Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome to another episode of Finalysis, Avatar The Last Airbender. Or, seeing as it's just me today, Avatar The Legend of Aang, because that's the British name for it, and frankly it's a much better title. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. My good friend and colleague Antoine has come up with the idea for the 15th anniversary of the show, big moment, can't believe that much time has passed, to create our own personal team avatars, as though we ourselves had been chosen to be the avatar and bring balance to the world, as it were. I thought it was a cool idea, so I figured I'd give my own 2 cents. And I had a lot of fun creating the team. I've got some obvious picks, or at least one obvious pick. I think everyone's, or a lot of people are going to be going along the same line on a particular bending discipline. I'm sure you can all guess which. But as for the others, I was somewhat surprised with my decisions. I've come up with my kind of criteria for the team has been along the lines of the specific skills and abilities that the mentors would be able to impart. Both with the bending disciplines themselves and also just general, life lesson, the sort of wisdom they could pass on. Obviously, alongside that, I'm going with the personality compatibility because that's one of the most important things you can have with the teacher-student relationship. If you don't jibe with your mentor, then you're not really going to learn much from them. So that was obviously key. And lastly, I was considering the idea of narrative interest. So what kind of character dynamic these people were bringing to the team, how that would kind of shape the story of this Team Avatar. Because ultimately, the story of Team Avatar is a journey, whether it be independent training one-on-one or going on a trip as a singular group, as we saw with Avatar Aang, obviously. But yeah, those are my chosen criteria for this. So without further ado, let's jump right in with my chosen element of origin, air. Now, air is an interesting one. For obvious reasons, there aren't that many options to choose from. But for me, I went with someone who had perhaps the least screen time of anyone that had any screen time at all in terms of airbending. And I did that because this character left, even though they had barely a minute's screen time, they left an impression on me as a child, and on reviewing since, it kind of reinforced that impression. Someone who I think represents the kind of philosophical and moral and appreciation in relation to duty, which is extremely important for the role of an avatar and lessons they can teach you, despite their personal origins, that being air, obviously, and the kind of guru-like monk mentality of the airbending kind of culture, the air nomads. So my choice was Yang Chen. There are obviously characters that have significantly more presence in the story of Avatar. People we know to be accomplished teachers for airbending. Tenzin is the obvious example. But he, I found, a little bit too regimented in his training of Korra. Now, that's something that I wouldn't necessarily find a problem in general, but when it comes to the realm of airbending, and that discipline in particular, I wanted someone who was a bit more aware, self-aware, maybe. Not that Tenzin isn't that, but he can sometimes lose himself in his work, for lack of a better term. And I think that's something that an airbender or air nomad of, or air nun, I guess, of Yang Chen's stature wouldn't do. And as I said, she's someone from the very short snippet we see in the show, I think I can vibe with on a spiritual and moral level, which is very important to me, particularly because the airbending culture and discipline is so tied to that kind of spiritual element, pun not intended. So yeah, Yang Chen is my choice. I also think that she will jibe well with the other team members that I've selected for my mentors on a narrative level. It makes for an interesting group chemistry, as maybe you'll agree when I tell you about my next choices. On to Earth, I think, because that's my secondary choice of element. So for Earth, this is an obvious one, at least for anyone who knows anything about my tastes in Avatar. I have gone for Toph. Lest we forget, she is the greatest earthbender in the world, and also, I think, the epitomal example of an earthbender. Obviously, and that's why she's so good. She's someone who I would probably have friction with on a personal level if he was a real person that I knew, but I know that kind of relationship, that kind of dynamic would be the thing that best draws the kind of mastery of earthbending out of me, the kind of potential that I would have. That kind of relationship you kind of have to meet and resolve head on, similar in how Katara and Toph kind of meld eventually. And that to me is a good kind of step in the right direction for actually learning the discipline. As Aang had to do himself with the boulder, you can't really sidestep and dodge around a personality like that, particularly if they happen to be your, prospective mentor. So yeah, I was attracted to the idea on that level. But also there's the fact that, this is someone who at the age of 10 was the best earthbender on the face of the earth, or Avatar Earth, whatever the name they've got for that is. I don't think they've got a name for that one yet. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, at the age of 10, she's capable of reaching these heights. We don't have a clue what she looked like in her 20s or 30s in terms of her, prime abilities. I mean, this is someone who, struggled with sandbending for multiple reasons, and in about a month and a bit had mastered the art. So, this is someone who, in terms of skill level, you can't find a better candidate to teach you. Even better than most avatars, I would imagine. And yeah, on top of that, again, going back to the character dynamic, the team kind of narrative interest side of things, I think that she would make an interesting person to butt heads with not only Yang Chen, but another of my selections. In fact, both of my other selections, just for different reasons. And I would like to see that kind of that story play out, as it were. So yeah, that's Earth for me. Moving on to Fire, I think. So for Fire, I chose Iroh. Because Iroh. I mean, I feel like that's not a surprise to anyone. A lot of people are going to be making the same call here. He's one of the wisest and most spiritual companions you could select. He's one of the greatest firebenders we see in the show and in the lore at large. He is an interesting character for pretty much any team dynamic. So he's kind of one of those people who's compatible with all situations on a comic relief level, on a character building level. I mean, he's someone who can relate to human nature across the board, really. And I think anyone can agree there is a lot to learn from this man, both in terms of personal growth on a kind of character level, and also his own actual martial discipline. He brings a lot to the realm of firebending that most wouldn't even consider. Chief among them, in my opinion, the idea of blending all elements into one kind of mental focus, akin to how the Avatar is supposed to do across the board in general. So yeah, Iroh's the obvious pick here for me. Oh, also tea. So water was the most surprising for me. It's probably the element I have the least interest in personally. I find it more dynamically appealing than firebending, for example, and certainly more visually appealing in terms of the martial art itself on screen and page now than, say, earthbending outside of the absolute masters, of which there are very few, really, in the grand scheme. But in terms of the spiritual side, in terms of the kind of unique flair of the bending discipline in the show, I find it it kind of draws on the most from real world disciplines. The idea of Tai Chi, the idea of yin and yang, push, pull. It's just something that doesn't personally gel with me on a kind of I don't get excited by it, if you know what I mean. Something I've noticed with waterbending as a discipline is that the greatest masters of it that we see tend to a lot of the time be pushers for a discipline, an art that's all about push and pull. I mean, very rarely outside of the physical movements do we see any idea of push and pull in their mentalities. Certainly when they're operating at their absolute best. So yeah, I've always found that interesting. Katara's the obvious choice here, and I think a lot of people will probably agree with that. But to me, I don't think I'd jibe well with her as a teacher. It's hard for me to put my finger on why, but I don't think I'd get much out of learning under her. Again, not entirely sure why, but I get that feeling. Someone who I didn't think I would jibe with, particularly in this realm, however, is Korra, who is my ultimate choice for the selection of Waterbending Master. Which is interesting because we don't actually see Korra do much with water compared to the other elements. It's not something that you kind of align with her in terms of personality or general, narrative design. She's not really a waterbender in terms of how she approaches things. But at the same time, neither am I. So I think it would kind of be a good fit for learning the discipline and not being kind of steeped and held down in the fact that I don't jibe with the mentality of the art. On top of that, I find her personality generally appealing and really, really good fit for the team dynamic I've assembled already at this point. Toph and Korra would get along like house on fire, particularly in their prime, if both of them in their prime anyway. And I think there'd be a good counterbalance between those two more grounded and practical combatants and general spiritualists alongside the likes of Yang Chen and Iroh. Iroh being kind of the bridge between the two extremes, as it were. I mean, obviously, with Yang Chen being the ultimate spiritualist that she, as an air nomad master, would be, despite, her more grounded mentality in terms of, again, going back to her idea of duty, there's going to be some friction, not from her side necessarily, but from the more kind of straightforward, boots on the ground types of characters that are Korra and Toph. I can see some sort of like chafing under that kind of mentality in the group. So Iroh would be an excellent bridge between the two and kind of leveling both sides into a more even keel. But yeah, ultimately those are my selections. I'm interested in the group dynamic. I want to see this story play out. These kind of characters assembled together to take this journey. In terms of training the Avatar, I think it would be fascinating to learn from each of them, in particular as a collective. Because none of these characters is ultimately one note. Each are able to take the straightforward route. Each are able to take the more wise and considered options. Yang Chen, I know, is someone we don't have a particularly large wealth of information on, but you can get a lot from the very small amount of time you spend with her. On top of the fact that her culture is a lot more unified in how they approach things. You can draw a lot from other characters' ways, and extrapolate that into what she would probably be like in her personality, at least in my opinion. So yeah, that's my team, I guess. That's my team Avatar. I hope you guys have enjoyed the discussion. This is a new format for me, ultimately, kind of just rambling to myself. So apologies if I've not done this quite as well as some others might have done. But I hope you've enjoyed. I certainly have, and maybe I can do something more like this in the future. Please, by all means, make your own team Avatar. I'd love to see what people think of different options and who strays from the norms on certain choices, who goes with the same but has interesting reasons for doing so. That'll be all kind of really fascinating for me to watch and listen in on. So I hope you guys jump on board and have a go at this, and I look forward to seeing it if you do. With that said, I'm Retty4, this has been Finalysis, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.